Welcome back to another episode of Dues of the Dead. This season, season 7, we are looking at the decade of the 1980s. A little bit of a bumpy ride to start us off. The movies that we've looked at so far, Prince of Darkness and Creepshow. So that we'll see maybe breaks that trend. But before we get into today's movie, we've got some quick cuts.
We do.
So go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So mine is, it's not cheating. It is a movie. But the thing is, I only watched half of it with the intention of going back.
Okay, fair.
But I'm not going to.
As long as it's a movie.
And we'll get to that. Okay. So this is a 2024 horror film directed by Juan Pablo Arias Munoz. Set in the 1960s, the story follows the Davis family as they navigate challenging times. Laura Davis separated from her husband, Frank, due to his alcoholism and unpredictable temper, and she returns to work as a nurse. Their daughters, 11-year-old Ellen and 16-year-old Judy, struggle with family dynamics. In an attempt to reconcile, Frank gifts Laura a beautiful antique necklace he found at the police station. Unbeknownst to them, the necklace serves as a conduit for the tormented soul of an evil boy from long ago, putting the entire family in grave danger. This stars two sisters who are real sisters in real life.
Okay.
Ellen McGraw and Violet McGraw, and Henry Thomas portraying Frank Davis. This has a 4.5 on Internet Movie Database. Okay. It only had one review on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay. And the review said, this all adds up to something that's PG-13 level tame and not enough to be unwatchable. It's boringly competent or good bad enough to be campy.
Do you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So unfortunately, I wasn't able to finish it because it was getting late. I went to bed and I had the intention originally of going back to watch it. I just can't bring myself to do it. This one it's pretty angsty. It's messed up in terms of just, so this guy's going through a divorce with his wife, and then he's a police investigator, and he found a nice necklace on a murder victim and decided to give that to his wife as like a reconciliation gift. So that alone was like, dude, that is just the young girl is quite good. Like her performance stood out, but mostly there's not much here. It sounds like from the reviews is not good. Yeah. I think the review is correct. It's not terrible, but it's not really good enough to continue watching. So I realize it's not fair to judge something if I haven't seen it in its entirety, but I had a pretty good idea. I was not, so unfortunately, Curse the Necklace, I would say avoid.
I'm in a similar position. I started a film called Vamp.
Oh yeah.
With Grace Jones, but I'm about halfway through it and I'm like, I don't know if I can finish this. I mean, I see where it's going and I don't know if I want to subject myself to that. My quick cut is Diabolique from 1996.
Wow.
A drama, thriller, mystery, horror, erotic thriller. An hour and 47 runtime, 5.5 on IMDb, 23 and 39% respectively on Rotten Tomatoes.
Ouch.
Yeah. I will discuss briefly. Jeremiah Chechik is the director. Sharon Stone, Isabella Gianni, Chaz Palminteri, Kathy Bates. Just by reading the cast, it should have been an awesome film.
Yeah, like I have not seen it, but I thought Diabolique, but maybe not.
So I wonder if you're conflating it with the original, which 1955 French film called Diabolique. Although they deviate from the story it wasn't classed as a remake, but it's the same name and the same premise. They just changed some of the things. So, this was one of many erotic thrillers in the 1990s. And
like a Basic Instinct kind of deal? Or?
Yeah. So I'll read you the summary is a wife and a mistress of the sadistic dean of an exclusive prep school conspire to murder him.
All right.
So you've got an interesting premise. You've got a strong cast, and yet they didn't do it. They couldn't pull it off. I didn't give a rat's about any of the characters. I mean,
just boring.
Yeah, it just didn't. Isabella Gianni is good. Chaz Palminteri is kind of like how we always is in these films. I noticed too, he's in a few of these erotic thrillers in the 1990s because I looked up a few.
Would you characterize it as horror?
No.
Because I'd heard of this film and in my mind, I wouldn't have put it in the horror
thriller
category.
For sure.
Okay.
I mean, I read it. That was how they on
Right on there.
IMDb.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I wouldn't put this in the horror sphere at all. And I mean, Sharon Stone can smoke a cigarette as sexily as any woman ever. It still didn't do it for me. And there were lots of like long pauses where, you know, she's smoking or whatever. It's like, okay. So yeah, it's really unfortunate because I was excited to watch it looking at the cast and I thought, oh, this is like, I like the storyline. I like the cast. And the Dean character seemed to be a bit of a caricature to me, like he a fully realized human being. They focused on one thing, that he was, you know, a bit of a jerk. But the other thing too is both women are doing the same guy and they both know.
Is Kathy Bates one of them?
So Sharon Stone and Isabella Gianni.
Right.
Isabella Gianni is his wife.
Okay.
Sharon Stone's the mistress.
Yep.
Sorry for spoilers, but I'm going to tell you not to watch this. So, anyway, yeah, it's just if you like the idea of the film, 55 original French film would be my. I've not seen it. I've seen clips. I do have it on my list to go back and watch. But this one wasn't worth it.
Okay, that's interesting. For whatever reason, A, I didn't consider it a horror movie, and B, I thought that it was well regarded, but maybe I'm thinking the original.
Yeah, I just wonder.
Like, I remember being a kid, this is in the 90s or something?
Yeah, 96.
So I remember seeing posters and hearing about Diabolique at the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, there's mixed reviews, but there aren't that many positive ones. I mean, 23% critic score.
Yeah, that's low.
That's low, right? Anyway, are we ready to head into our film?
We are.
Okay, so today we are looking at The Changeling from 1980.
Within this old house live two residents. One of them is John Russell, composer, professor. The other has been dead for over 70 years.
Claire, I'd like to talk to you about the house.
Runtime an hour and 46. IMDb was 7.1. Rotten Tomatoes 85 and 79% respectively. Peter Medic was the director. George C. Scott and Melvin Douglas. After experiencing tragic personal loss, a music professor rents a Seattle mansion, which appears to be haunted by a restless spirit. So this is a good old fashioned haunted house ghost story. There's no getting around that. Now, Roger Ebert said, this is a scare movie with taste, but he also said, if it only took craftsmanship to make a haunted house movie, The Changeling would be a great one. Which, if you read between the lines, he is a great one.
I would disagree with him.
So, going into this, you need to know that this is a slow-paced ghost story. I would say it's a mystery horror because part of it is procedural in the sense of John Russell, I think his name is. He's trying to figure out what is haunting this mansion.
Yep.
And that leads to a mystery that he's unraveling over the course of the film.
Yeah.
Fun fact, Trish Van Devere was fifth wife in real life.
Yeah.
And he was married. I looked it up today because I thought sorry, I'm all over the place. One of my maybe critiques was that I didn't, and I'm laughing because I wrote down, I didn't find there was any chemistry between the male and female leads, and they're married.
It's so funny you say that because one of my critiques is like, oh, she looks way too young to be in a relationship with this guy. And then like, oh, they were actually in a relationship.
Yeah, and it's so funny.
But I looked it up. So they were 14-year age gap, though. He's 14 years older than her. So it was a significant age gap. But I remember thinking like, I don't see you two together.
I know. It was like, no. there's anything romantic. She's way better looking than he is, and there's just no chemistry there.
Except in real life, they're actually together.
You know, the one thing I will say for Scott's performance in this film, I often find him to be over the top in his performances. Like if you look at Exorcist 3.
Had remember for sure seeing him something in was Exorcist 3.
I mean, I think his big, he's been in many, many films, but I think his big one was Patton.
Right. He won an Oscar for that.
I believe so. Yeah. So it's well crafted. It's a really bleak opening, which sets the scene, you know, for tragic loss. I would suggest, and you can agree or disagree, that this is 100% ambience driven. It's about the atmosphere. It's about.
I sort of agree in terms of horror, but I think one of the strengths of this movie is it is almost a horror. It does have like a very compelling mystery.
Yes.
So I would say it almost succeeds as a mystery film, and then the horror on top of it just kind of adds flavor.
Yeah.
But I agree. The horror is atmospheric.
Yeah. There's no jump scares, and there's no scary
effects.
monsters. Practicals would be the haunted house part.
Yeah.
And I was going to say something, but maybe I'll save it for spoilers. The camera angles I noticed as I was watching this time, I really liked. Sometimes the camera was low, making the camera full, but sometimes the camera was from up high. And anyway, I've talked a lot, but jump in here. And so it sounds like you liked it or enjoyed it to some extent.
I did actually really like it. I had heard of the Changeling before, and I think maybe I knew it was well regarded, but like I went back and watched Rosemary's Baby only a few years ago, and I was like, damn, this is like a classic. I really like it. Black Christmas was another one that I hadn't watched. This one's Canadian too, I believe.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. Speaking of Black Christmas, and that felt like a classic. Like this felt like a good classic horror movie. Like it, I would put it up there with those films or The Exorcist. Like I think this movie does not get enough, should be better known or should get more attention for how good it is.
Yeah, it flies under the radar.
I think it does fly under the radar. Now my critique, or not my critique, but like it almost seems inappropriate to put this horror decade season because it feels like a total 70s film to me. Like if I were to watch this and not know it was 1980, I would assume it was 70s because it feels like a 70s horror to me. It doesn't feel like what I associate 80s horror to be like. And cusp of those two decades, and I think 80s horror hadn't really started yet. This was probably actually being produced in the 70s and was released. Like when they started making the film,
more than likely, pre-production probably
would have started in maybe 78 or 79. Yeah. So in my mind, this feels like a 70s film, but you and I have talked about how I think we both 70s aesthetic and the 70s feel, and that's how it felt to me. But it's got a really good mystery that's honestly kind of compelling and cool. And then the horror elements are just very grounded.
Yeah.
There's nothing fancy, but it's effective. And actually, it's a weird comparison to make, but it reminded me a little bit of Paranormal because the thing, like in Paranormal Activity, it starts just very slow and subtle, but every night it just ramps up a little bit. And that's kind of how this felt. Like at first it's just like, there's a noise. Yeah. It's like, okay, there's a noise from downstairs, but you don't really think much of it. They don't dwell on it.
Yeah.
And because you don't need the horror to carry the film, is carrying the film.
Yeah, good point.
The horror is more in the background, but it ramps up. So it starts as something subtle, almost to the point you don't feel like you're watching a horror movie until you do.
Yeah.
And I think it's just very effectively done that way. And the acting is good. The characters are good. The story is good. And I like the of the haunting things that they do. So it never feels cheesy or bad because what they're doing is so subtle yet effective. But it's simple.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all of that. And I think it's rare in any decade, rare to have a good quality haunted house film.
Yes.
Because they're not easy to pull off and create atmosphere and ambiance and a little bit of a creep factor without resorting to things like jump scares or,
so many of them. haunted house films. Oh, here's the cheesy thing in the mirror shot. It's just
totally.
like, get out of here. Like The Conjuring was amazing. But most of them are relying on the same stupid jump scares. And this doesn't do that.
No. And there is another movie, which I won't mention right now, but it's another ghost story that is in the 80s.
Our list for the season? Or?
It is actually.
Okay, cool.
And it's very much in this vein. It's a slow burn. I think it's longer than this film a little bit. But story is compelling. And I just found this one. Yeah, I think George C. Scott was a powerful character, but not overbearing. His performance wasn't like over the top. When he got angry or got excited or whatever, it was in character. It didn't seem to be above and beyond the situation.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the Roger Ebert. So I also him, but his criticism was that George C. Scott was too good of an actor for this movie, or like his character was too confident. He never seems too scared. He's like too rational.
Yeah.
So you never feel like he's in danger because his character is just so
that's true.
Confident. I thought that's kind of interesting. I felt that like you don't feel scared, but he's never scared. And he rationalizes everything, and he's not.
Yeah.
Like usually in these haunted films, the characters are also terrified, so you kind of empathize with them. Whereas he's just very matter of fact. It doesn't ever seem too bothered by it.
No, and I think that's such a good word, is rational, for the explanation for what's happening.
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking that it's something paranormal or out of this world. He's like, okay, well, there must be a reason that this is happening.
Yeah.
And then even in terms of the mystery, that's, he's like, okay, I have to figure out what happened. This entity or whatever it is showing me, is bringing my attention to something. I have to find out what it is.
And my favorite scene, I think, was the seance.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really effective.
Yeah.
Like the woman running it and how they decide. Maybe we won't spoil it. Really worked for me. It felt very grounded in reality. Like this could be a real seance. Yeah. I think that's something the film does the whole way through. It never doesn't use bad effects or cheap practicals, or everything is very simple. It's like a noise, or it's like, oh, the tap.
Yes.
But it's executed in such a way where it just works. I liked it. I liked it a lot.
It never goes over the line where, like in the seance, and I think we'll talk more about that in the spoiler section, but like in the seance, there's no flying objects, there's no jittery kind of stuff. It's like you say, but I will talk about it in the spoiler section, because there's definitely part of that seance that had an impact on me when I watched it, because that's a really good scene.
Well, apparently it's based on supposedly real events.
Okay.
Russell Hunter, who wrote it, it was based on supernatural phenomena that he experienced in his mansion in Denver, Colorado, which maybe explains why the types of things that he's experiencing are things that you might experience in just an old creaky house or a haunted house that you might think felt supernatural, but you obviously wouldn't see things flying around. Or grounded, I think is kind of the word that came to mind.
And so one of the questions I had for you, I mean, you've answered, I think, most of my questions. Is this a horror? And you'd say second, mystery first, which I think is probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, but I think you would put this in the horror category.
I think so.
Sure.
Yeah. And up to modern viewing, I think it does.
It does.
Because it doesn't rely on practical effects or on things that get outdated fast.
Yeah.
Right.
It's very character based.
Yes.
And this mystery that happens could happen anytime.
Exactly.
Like it's just as relatable. It's not relying on the horror to carry the film.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, even though I do feel like that holds up, because they're not, it's when you go back and you see 80s films which have cheesy practical effects that you're like, this doesn't hold up 40 years later, but there's nothing here that can't hold up.
Yeah. Like you say, it's basically characters and a house. And, things happen, but they're more kind of unexplainable, as opposed to, oh, I just saw this apparition go by me, or, whatever.
And because it holds up so well, that's why I'm surprised it doesn't get more attention.
Yeah. Because it's critically well regarded too. I mean, if you look at 85, was it 85? do I have this right? Did you look up?
No, I thought you were. No, I did not.
No, so I do have 23 and 39% for.
That was for.
Oh
your
no, that
quick
was for
time.
my. Never mind.
I was gonna say.
85 and 79.
There
Sorry, I
we
went
go.
past my notes. Yeah, 85 and 79. It's a strong.
That's very strong.
Yeah. Quote unquote horror film. Yeah. So this is not a scare fest. It's not a gore fest. It's definitely something that as a viewer, you have to engage in and watch.
Yeah, this is not a phone scrolling film, but it does get under your skin. Like I did, but it's a slow burn.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's effective, but you want to, I think you're right. Immerse yourself in it.
Did you believe, and maybe I was just more critical because I did a music degree. Did you believe that he was a composer?
Oh, I didn't question it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess I questioned it just because I know George C. Scott and I'm like, and I'm always amazed when they do, especially piano stuff, because you'll see the person, kind of move or whatever. And then it'll cut away, do a punch else's hands. And then they'll, there's never a seamless, unless the person's really playing, there's never really a seamless transition from, a torso to a hand shot. There's always, I find, and that's just a way around it. And I get it. You have somebody's hands playing and then you'll see Scott, put writing away and, composing or whatever. So, that's just nitpicky stuff.
Yeah, it didn't seem important enough to the film.
Yeah, that's fair.
It didn't bother me. Or
it doesn't matter really what he does.
I didn't think so, really.
No.
Like they show him in the lecture hall once, have good rapport with the students. He's kind of like funny and they like him. But other than that, the music part didn't really play into the plot at all, really, other than one thing.
Yeah.
But we talked about that in the spoilers.
Yes, exactly. We'll talk about that in the spoilers. Do you anything else you want to mention before we jump into spoilers?
I don't think so. I just read another. This is not a real mansion or a real house.
No, apparently they spent like $200,000 building this.
Building like the front of a house in Vancouver.
Yeah.
So it looked like a mansion, but it wasn't real. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Just a fun fact. But
because I often want, I think it was filmed in Vancouver and Seattle were the two locations. Yeah, just really, and funny, I didn't look this up, but the beginning scene, the very beginning, that looked like the Coquihalla to me.
Oh yeah.
Parts when you've got the rest stops and
it could have been.
Yeah, it could have been, right?
Sure.
Because they were on the West Coast at that point. But
if you're looking for a treacherous highway, that's
okay. So if we don't have anything else, we're going to get into spoilers.
I think so. Yeah. So do you recommend The Changeling?
I do recommend The Changeling.
I also recommend The Changeling.
2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
And now into spoilers.
Yep.
Spoilers.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
Okay, let's talk about the seance scene.
Yeah.
One of the things that really liked about what they did was the scribbling.
Me too.
That was so good because it really gave you the impression of this woman receiving information and just trying to,
because a lot of it would be like just nothing scribbles, but then you'd see a word.
Yes.
But it would be so fast and kind of frantic. And then I have not seen a seance scene like that before.
No.
I've not seen that done. I'm surprised how someone hasn't tried to copy it. Maybe they did, and I just haven't seen that film. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I feel the same way. The seance scenes that I've seen in films are often like over the top things where, something happens or it's a con.
Yeah.
So it's, made to look like a con. This one, I think I like your word grounded is, it's kind of like it could happen in real life. It's just people sitting at a table. Some people I think he's a little skeptical of the medium, but she's doing her thing. And it's not till late when he listens back to the tape of the seance that he hears things that were going on that he might not have heard at the time.
Yeah. And so that all works, right?
Yeah.
Like you say, it's ground. Like I could see in a seance I don't really believe in that thing, but if you were to do that, that works for me. I could see how that would make sense.
Yeah. I mean,
and the woman doing it is really convincing. Like her eyes are kind of fluttering.
Yes.
She's kind of staring off into space and her hand is going and the guy's there helping. Like it was a very One of the better seance scenes I've seen.
Agreed.
Other than Drag Me to Hell, maybe.
I also like what am I trying? Oh, the banging that you hear at the beginning.
It's creepy.
Yeah, it's very creepy, and it reminded me of not Mike Flanagan's Hill House, but the original Haunting of Hill House, because that's in that movie where there's these bangs in the walls, and that would be very. I mean, unnerving is kind of underwhelming, but
at first I thought it was the piano, but it wasn't.
Yeah,
because they explain what that sound is supposed to represent later. But
yeah, I mean, to me, that was a very that's a really in the early part of the film where he's hearing that banging, and again, old house, it could be pipes, right? If there's an airlock in the pipe or whatever.
Someone says that at some point, right? Old houses, they just make noises.
They make noises.
Yeah.
But there's another, the Historical Society that he goes, they're looking up, I think, who the previous owners were and things like that. And there's one woman who's kind of creepy, and she says that house doesn't want people in it. And you find out later that she's kind of covering for something and working for somebody else. But the other thing that really worked, especially the first time I saw it. I mean, now I know that it's coming, so it's.
Actually, I meant to ask you that. What your first experience was with the Changeling?
I've seen it a number of times, but to be honest, I don't remember the first time I saw it. My guess would be in the 80s, but not when it first came out. 14 when this first came out.
And do you think it made much of an impact on you at the time, or was something you've appreciated more over time?
No, it definitely made an impact on me. It was creepy. And I was going to say the scene that I was thinking of that I remember having an impact on me the first time I watched it was the rubber ball scene. I mean, so his personal loss at the beginning is his wife and his daughter are hit and die in a car accident, and he survives. And he's kept this, with those white, red, and blue striped rubber balls that. Anyway, I'm sure they're still around in dollar stores. Anyway, he keeps his daughter's ball, and he brings that to the house with him, and then it comes down the stairs when he's at the bottom of the stairs. And I think, that does have an impact on him, because he takes the ball, he throws it over a bridge into the water, and then he comes home and it bounces down the stairs again. And that was creepy. Like, that wigged me out a little bit the first time I saw it.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because in all the reviews and stuff, like, that's the scene that everyone pointed to that was like so powerful. But to me, I found that.
Yeah.
And maybe had you watched at the time, maybe that hadn't been overdone. But when he drives and he throws the ball, it's like, okay, it's going to be right back in the house. So that almost felt almost cliche, or almost like, okay, I expected that. But I think I'm in the minority, because many people seem, and yourself, that's a good, another example, really hit them hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is accurate, because as a seasoned movie viewer, if they're going to spend time on an object, it's going to have importance.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's a red herring, right? If you see in passing, a pen and there's a little bit of a linger on it, like, somebody's going to get stabbed with that pen later, whatever the case happens to be, right? So I totally get that. But I think at the time, I don't know if that was cliche. I mean, I didn't know enough about movies at the time, and I don't remember like that. But I guess the idea of, in a haunted house, things going missing or things coming back that you tried to get rid of, or kind of like in Annabelle, right? Yes. They throw her out and she's back in the chair, kind of thing.
It's an example of something that's very simple, but has a lot of impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Because what happened, right?
Yeah.
When we've talked about that, if left to your own devices as a viewer, you're probably going to imagine things more terrible than what they could put on screen.
Yeah, if you can choose between some lame CG face in a mirror or a simple ball dropping down the stairs that's over a bridge, like, that's way more effective. And it's simple, it's grounded, and it's
Yeah, and I think
and that's the choice they make over and over again in this film.
exactly.
It's all simple to execute, nothing fancy, but in totality and the way it's executed, it works very well and it's creepy.
Yeah, and agreed. I mean, I think is what makes this successful is that they never fall back on a cheap trick. They never do the face in the mirror. They never do an apparition. They never do, writing on a wall or like there's voices. Okay. I mean, I'm not sure how else you would get across your
right in the recording.
In the recording. Yeah. Do you want so the mystery is
so full spoilers here because this is if you've not seen it and you're gonna watch it, you don't want to hear. I think the mystery's quite good.
Yeah, the mystery's really good. And I agree with Mike that the film and the horror elements are kind of like icing on the cake. So the mystery is this house has been unlived in for quite a long time. There was a well-to-do original owner, and there's a local senator who's ostensibly son of this man who built the house and whatever. But what we discover is that he had a son who had something, polio is my best guess, but was in a wheelchair. And I guess the father didn't think that would be the person to carry on his legacy.
Wouldn't he have to live to 21 or something to claim the inheritance or something? So
the dad drowns the boy and then finds a replacement for him, sends him away to Europe. And when he comes back, nobody really questions it because he's grown up, right? And the history hinges on is the St. Christopher's medal that George C. Scott finds, and the mystery goes on and he confronts the senator and so on. But I think the only criticism that really landed with me was someone, a critic, I think it was just a viewer, that the leaps that in logic that George C. Scott's character makes are a little bit, stretching credulity. Yeah. Because he's just like, oh, well, there's this and this and this. He like puts it all together. But in the story, because he does seem like a very rational person.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with those sort of mystery films or like Matlock back in the day, right? It's like most people would never put these pieces together, or even like Sherlock Holmes or
It's kind of like that Sherlock Holmes thing, right? You just say, okay, well, that's how his mind did or whatever. But
like when you mention it, it's like, yep, I totally get that. But at the time, it didn't bother me, or I didn't consider that.
No, I didn't either. It was only in hindsight when I read the criticism. It's like, okay, I can see that. But it did not, I did not spend a second thinking about how could he possibly know that, or how could he make that assumption. The story is performed and written well enough that for me, I didn't question any of that.
Yeah. And apparently Russell Hunter, the guy who this was based on real events, he did find a kid's bedroom that was like,
like up in his attic.
Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of the impetus thing started. And that's pretty creepy.
Yeah.
Just find like an old rundown kid's bedroom locked away in your house.
I mean, I've always found music boxes a little creepy.
Yes.
And
and you realize the significance of, yeah. So as the boy is being drowned by his father in the bathtub, he knocks and the music is playing. And that was a bit darker than I was expecting because the film, well, I guess it starts with a pretty tragic opening, but they show it in quite a bit of detail, I suppose.
Yeah. But
like the boys thrashing around.
Yeah. But again, there's nothing egregious about those scenes. Like, I mean, even the beginning, it's bleak and you know what happens, but they don't spend any time on the aftermath of the accident.
Yeah.
You know that it happens. You see from his grief that, he's left alone. Angled bodies or like the car over the cliff. Like they didn't need to do any of that, and they didn't.
But it's dark enough that it earns that that haunting possibility. Yeah. I was just really impressed with this film all around. Like I really don't have any serious critiques, and it pulls it off pretty well. And I did find George C. Scott a little over the top at times in the screaming about pretty inane things, something about like files or it's not in the file. And he's just like going crazy, like screaming at the top of his lungs, like, dude. But I actually found him a little more grounded. Totally. I think Ebert's criticism was he was too grounded.
Okay.
And that he didn't react enough to like the haunting stuff that was happening. And
fair.
I actually like Trish Vanderveer a lot. I hadn't seen her in much either.
No, I think if you watch, I don't know much about her career, but I remember seeing her in like 70s TV. I think she was in TV movies and obviously some things on the big screen too. But yeah, I'm a little bit taken aback because I wasn't sure how you would take this film because it was so slow going.
Yeah.
And I know you like a slow burn, but this is very slow, very relaxed pace in the sense that it's not rushing and dropping hints. It's doing little things. So why do you think this film works for you, even though there are elements of 80s in this?
Yeah, I don't know. I think for whatever reason, I love 70s feel, the atmosphere, the pacing, the aesthetic. And to me, like, I felt like I was watching a 70s film. Like, I get it was in 1980, but if you were to stylistically compare this to 80s horror, 70s horror, like, it fits in 70s horror.
Yeah.
And I like those. I think it's grounded enough, but character driven.
Yeah.
I think my thing is I really like character.
Yeah.
In 1980s horror, oftentimes has bad characters.
Yeah.
Or they're body count characters, right? They're not.
Yeah.
Whereas like George C. Scott's character, like, starts at the beginning, he's got his family, you see his like progression and his growth and what he's going through and his relationship with her and the house. It's very well executed. So I think maybe 70s horror are just usually better films than 80s horror.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, I wonder, because in one of our quick cuts episode, I was talking about a film that I saw, and my criticism was the performances and the characters. Like, I didn't care about the characters. So whatever fate they endured was like, okay, well, so what?
Yeah.
Like, you didn't do anything to endear me to you. So I think, this is going to be a bold statement, but it's actually not a statement, it's a question. Do you think that 70s movies in general, this is a big brush to tar all the films with, are on average and
I do
modern film?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think maybe with horror as well, because my impression from watching like horror documentaries and stuff is in the 80s, people got really excited about practical effects and look what we can do with this and look what we can do with gore. And so Tom Savini and all this.
Yeah.
So I think way like trying to almost have like an arms race of like who can do the coolest practical effects. And whereas 70s just, again, I've used the word grounded a lot, but it seems to be more grounded. It's more about the story. It's more about the character. It's more about the dialogue. And the horror is simple enough that it holds up and it's more realistic. Whereas like 80s horror, because it's so predicated on practical effects that maybe 40 years later don't hold up quite the same way, or it's just goofier, or it's, I don't know. There's something about it and it's hard to describe.
And then the 90s, the 90s is basically a bit of a void for horror films. There's The Faculty, what is it? Something behavior, disturbing behavior.
Oh yeah.
But then you get into like later in the 90s and early thousands, you've got, now it's not practical effects, it's CG.
That's right.
And everything seems, the film almost seems to be driving to the next set piece that's going to allow you to have practical effects or CG or whatever, right?
And it's hard because recency bias, but
I
feel like you could confidently say from like 2013 on, I think sort of starting from The Conjuring or an age of horror. And Agreed. I think pound for pound, like when you look at the top 10 lists that we do every year for the last decade, they're pretty stacked with a lot of really good films. And I don't know if any other decade can pound for pound stack up against the last 10 years.
I would agree. Because even in the 70s. I mean, you look at, right?
Every decade has a couple.
Yeah. But not one after the other with fresh ideas, fresh takes on things. Even the remakes, like the Evil Dead remake by Fede Alvarez, was from the original.
Yeah.
That he put his own stamp on it, and it was enjoyable for me. So yeah, I think if you look from 2013 on.
In the last 2 months, we've had Nosferatu, Heretic, and The Substance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that alone is incredible. Yeah. And then you just throw like Terry and The Conjuring and
Talk to Me,
exactly. Yeah. And then you go into the Asian horrors, and you have like The Sadness and Train to Busan and The Wailing. It's stacked. So I think, lucky for us, we are living in a time where the horror is off the charts good. I think really good ones. The 80s had a lot, but I think we'll find out maybe not as much that holds up over time.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that
The Thing I really like. That's
a great film. The Shining, even though I mean it holds up as a film, even though Stephen King didn't like what that I think a big difference in modern viewing is that we have global cinema, so we can see Japanese horror, Korean horror, other South Asian horror. We can see Spanish. In the 70s, you wouldn't be able to see that.
No,
like even, I mean, if there were a bootleg copy, which I don't think there would be, I'm not sure you would, like, I'm just trying to think about even technology. Like now you've got people with cameras, and then uploading it to the internet for even if somebody had an 8mm projector, those things were super loud. You'd have to change reels. There was no sound, it's just, we're so spoiled for choice.
Yeah.
In the modern era.
And I think the cinema landscape is just in a place well for horror, because I think in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, if you want to be a big name director, you don't really want to be associated with the horror genre. Yeah. Like it's all the big name dramas and the war epics, and that's where you want to be. But mainstream cinema now is basically Marvel movies,
sadly,
and comedy. If you're a director who cares about making good films, you can't make your historical epic or your drama and succeed in the same way in the box office. I just don't think they do as well. So I feel like the horror genre is where like a lot of the good indie filmmakers are going, because you don't have to compete with film.
Yeah.
But there's an audience for horror, and they actually can make money. So yeah, I don't know if the Ari Asters and the Eggers and Hunting Hill House,
Mike
Flanagan. Like if those guys are around in the 80s, gonna not be making horror films.
Right.
But I feel like there's a lot of space if you're an indie filmmaker right now to make really killer horror movies.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, I would agree with that. I think in the 70s in particular, there were a lot of, and I mean, this is a pretty broad brush, right? It's hard
100%.
to characterize a whole decade of film. But I think there were a lot of crime dramas. There were a lot of thrillers, but not a lot of good horror. And I think directors
in the 70s,
in the 70s,
I think in the 90s as well.
Yeah. I mean, in the 90s, you had a lot of those, as I mentioned, with Diabolique, you had thrillers.
Yeah. Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct.
Yeah. I mean, so I think what's fascinating to me is that even after a decade of killer horror films, we can still go back to a movie that's 45 years old and enjoy it, and also put it up there and say, yeah, this actually holds up. This is worth viewing even now, 45 years later, right?
Totally. Yeah. So I know we're deviating a little bit from this film, but I think part of the fun thing about doing a season of 80s horror is kind of looking at the decade and comparing it to other time periods. We will do that a bit more this season, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think the very nature of looking at films from a particular decade, begs comparison. Well, how does that compare with films of the 70s or the 90s or whatever?
Do you feel like this feels like more like 70s horror though than 80s horror?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think because, like you say, it's on the cusp. pre-production would have been done in the late 70s. I mean, even the car he drives is probably a 78 or 79. So yeah, I think that would stand up. Like it feels like a 70s film. Like there's that element of whatever that je ne sais quoi quite describe about 70s films. I think that's a key component of this film for sure.
Yeah. But I'm glad you recommended it. That's the cool thing about this season.
Yes.
Because I've not seen a lot of these. And this one I had maybe heard about, but I was not going to run out and watch The Changeling. So yeah, it's one of the better horror movies I've seen in a while. So
yeah. One of the beauties of what we do is that we can, I mean, either in the quick cuts or whatever, we can come across films that either we hadn't heard about or it wasn't really on our list to see anytime soon.
Yeah.
You know, if you actually listen to recommendations that people make to you, you might see those. My mind there. But anyway, anything else to say about this film?
No, I think that's it. I would encourage you. I know if you're younger and you're used to watching modern horror, that maybe going back and watching a film from 1980 might not feel super compelling. But I think this one's worth a shot. I was really impressed.
Yeah. And maybe, I mean, what I would add to that is, maybe pair it with something that's similar, like a ghost story or a haunted house story, and see for yourself whether this stands up for you. And you go, oh yeah, this is a solid story based on characters as a, elements outside of the performance.
Yeah, don't go in expecting The Conjuring or something.
Totally, right? Because, there aren't those kind of jump scares and the practical effects of, showing a face or, those kinds of things. But
that's the difference, right? Like we've seen The Conjuring, we've seen Hereditary, we love those movies. Yet I can go and still get something out of it and have it be a satisfying horror experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I won't say for maybe some other films we do this season. Well,
the two that we started with, Prince of Darkness and Creepshow, didn't really do it for us in hindsight, right? Yeah. So it's like, yeah, we can actually recommend this one.
I do recommend this one.
All right, there you go.
I think that's it.
2 recommendations, and we'll see you in the aisles.